And so today is going to be a little bit different than our previous sessions. So we've had sessions in the past on the biochemistry section, the chem physics section. So this is going to be more interactive. So I've got some questions that y'all have submitted prior to this session, and also questions that you might have now. This will kind of be an open format for you to ask any questions you have about the biochemistry section, or if you run out of questions for that, we can always talk about other aspects of the MCAT, and we can talk about specific cases and get into more detail about stuff you're curious about. So let's begin with some of the questions that we got. Let's do a couple of easy ones. Are we allowed to have a calculator? No, you're not allowed to have a calculator, but that's actually good because that way they are obligated to make it easy for you. When it comes to the type of math you're going to get, it's going to be round numbers, like things that divide into like 1.5, 2, 2.5. You're not going to get some crazy computational stuff because you don't have the ability to do it unless you have a calculator. So that's actually going to work to your advantage. Now, the key is to practice enough with these types of problems and recognize fast ways of doing them. We've done a couple of workshops related to that. And you can always reach out to us if you want the links to those. And even if you don't feel like you're a mathematical or mathematically oriented person, just like any other aspect of the MCAT, it's a skill that can be learned. And over time, if you practice, you can actually get pretty good at it, and it'll make your life a lot easier if you're able to learn how to do some of these mental math techniques. Let's see. Do we have to memorize all the amino acid structures? Yes. You should memorize all the 20 amino acids that are used in humans to produce protein. There's some other ones, you don't really have to know those. You should know, I might have a slide for this in my old presentation. Let's see. Maybe I don't. Okay, amino acids. You should know for every single one what the structure is. You should know what the structure is. You should know whether it's polar or non-polar, acidic or basic. You should know whether it would be found on the inside or the outside of a protein. That usually correlates with what its properties are. So a polar amino acid is likely to be found on the surface. A non-polar amino acid is probably buried deep in the protein. I mean structure, not just recognize. I mean, you should memorize the structure. I should be able to say histidine, and you should be able to draw it really quickly. And that might sound a little bit daunting if you haven't had a lot of practice with amino acids, but you do enough practice and you'll be able to do it pretty easily. But like a lot of things on the MCAT, the memorization is just practice. So you should be able to recognize, if I say aspartic acid, you should be able to draw it, tell me that it is charged at physiological pH with a negative charge. It's probably on the surface of the protein. Stuff like that. Histidine, basic, positively charged. It has a ring, and you should be able to draw it. So you should also know the 3-letter and 1-letter abbreviations for every amino acid. Yeah. And you should be able to recognize that like the acidic ones are going to have their side chains will have a pKa in below 7, and the basic ones will have a pKa for their side chain above 7. Okay. Let's see what else. What are the most common errors when studying for the biochemistry part of the MCAT? I think the main struggle that people have is knowing when to dive into the details. So, for example, amino acids, you should know them extremely well. Glycolysis, you should know the enzymes and the names, maybe the structures. Citric acid cycle, you need to know the names and the enzymes, but not the structures. Um, you don't, let's see, you don't have to know like every single element of the pentose phosphate pathway, but you should know what it does and why it's useful. So I think getting a sense for where where you have to put your attention is going to be a challenge. So like I'll give you an example from my old presentation. Here, glycolysis, you should know enzymes, intermediate structures, inputs and outputs, under what conditions is it occurring, and then what some of the major regulation steps are. Citric acid cycle, you should know enzymes, intermediates, but no structures, inputs, outputs, conditions, regulation. Oxidative phosphorylation, you should know like what the proteins are, what the electron carriers are, what the order of what their order is, where they're positioned, how many electrons they carry, which ones are pumps, which ones aren't, where does NADH drop its electrons off, where does FADH2 drop its electrons off, stuff like that. And then mitosis, meiosis, these kinds of things, etc. And don't worry, you're going to get the recording within a day or two of this session. So don't worry if you don't write all of this down. So the point is that just based on, and it's hard to know exactly what's important, and that's why I think sessions like this can be helpful. The main thing I see as a stumbling block for people is this. So every question has exactly one right answer, but not necessarily exactly one true answer. So like you'll see like why is so and so mechanism occurring, and it'll give you 4 answers. 2 of them are just wrong. One of them might be true but has no bearing on the question, and then one of them is true and actually like linked to the question that's being asked. And so getting stuck because there's multiple true answers is a common mistake to make. Let's see what else we got. So, okay. For test takers in mid-June, there are a couple of you guys here. So it depends on kind of where you are. I would say like by this point you should definitely either have taken or be about to take a practice test. Getting a good idea of where you're at is really important. Keeping a list of all the mistakes that you're making, whether they're large or small, will help you like pin them down and be able to recognize where your blind spots are and what you need to pay attention to, and then you can fix those by the time the exam comes around. How do you not get burnt out studying? That's one that's kind of different for everybody, but I think it's harder when you have like a job or doing something else while also studying. But I think the key is to spread it out. So like I think the optimal time for studying for the MCAT is between 4 to 5 months. That way you're not like overstressed. You can spend some hours every week and have like consistent progress rather than just cramming. I think consistency beats intensity on the MCAT 100% of the time. And it's important that you don't I know that the MCAT can be pretty intimidating, but it's important that you not throw the rest of your life temporarily out the window just to focus on this exam, because like you should still do other things. You should still socialize where you're able to safely. You should still like do things that um, make you happy and you're interested in, and like exercise, eat well, all that kind of stuff, the same that you would do if you weren't studying. Um, because you're still a person, and you still have to sustain the rest of yourself besides the test taking, information processing part of your brain. What topic should we concentrate on for biochemistry? It's a great question. So I have a 50 slide presentation that I've already done on this, and so that recording should be available to you. We did a couple months ago. I think it's pretty comprehensive as far as what you should go over. But I kind of approach it mainly as like, here's how to look at it from a test taking perspective. But as far as like topics to go over, the AAMC website has a PDF that has really solid what was I going to say? That it's got a really solid description of all the topics that you have to know. MCAT-review.org, also a great site. It's a little more general, but it pretty much covers everything. Question from Angel. I'm taking the MCAT on June 18th. Is it too late to apply to medical school if I want to retake? June 18th is kind of late regardless. Because you kind of want to have your results by June. So if you want to if you feel comfortable sharing your further details, you're welcome to unmute yourself. But if you want to reach out to us one-on-one, we can definitely talk further about that. It's up to you. So, and you can interrupt me at any time if you decide that you want to talk further about that. Okay. Now I'm going to open it up to questions from everybody. Okay. When is the latest MCAT date? I'm not sure exactly when the like absolute drop dead date is, but I would say don't take it. I usually wouldn't push it past like mid-May. Just to be completely safe. Maybe I'm being a little bit too conservative, but as far as I know, you want to have that score in hand by mid-June. Yeah. Tips on test taking. So general tips on test taking. So there's another presentation that I did that was 3 months ago. You should also have access to a recording on. If you don't, let us know. That I went over general test taking tips. I also went over biology test taking tips in that last presentation from 2 months ago. And but I would say in general, for the MCAT specifically, use every single break to do something. Whether I would recommend taking a bathroom break every single time, whether or not you feel like you have to, because you at least you kind of move your legs a little bit, walk around, eat something, drink something, because they're going to be super annoying and not let you take any water or food into the testing room, and you don't want to have to check in and out of security just to get a drink of water while you're trying to take the exam during a section. Don't negotiate against yourself, especially either when you're taking the test and when you're practicing. And by that I mean, when you see a question that confuses you, don't assume that you don't know how to solve it. Because I see this all the time with students that I tutor is they will see a question, they will decide that they don't know how to do it, and then they will get it wrong. But then when they come back and look at it later, it seems obvious because they're not stressed and in the mindset where they think they don't know things. So when you're practicing, you should see every single question as either something you know or something that you will learn once you finish taking the exam or finish doing that question. There's not going to be anything you don't know when you're practicing by the time you actually go over your materials. So you get a question on the citric acid cycle, you get it wrong, then you go back and review the citric acid cycle. Now you know that stuff. And you know that specific detail that you got wrong. So I think keeping a growth mindset is very important. On the actual exam itself, the same thing, even though you're not going to get to review and fix your mistakes necessarily, unless you retake it, which you totally could, if that is something that you feel is necessary. Then it's still fine because all you have to, while you're taking the actual exam, you got to remember that that you might not know everything, but just because you don't know one thing doesn't mean you don't know other things. So it's really easy to spiral when you're taking an exam and you don't know something, and keeping that in mind will help you avoid that. All right. Other questions?
I have a question. How
Yeah.
representative is your question bank? And also, in terms of the difficulty, how is it compared to double ANC?
It's a good question. Okay, so for anybody who doesn't know, UWorld is, in my opinion, the greatest third-party MCAT resource in existence. And it's basically just a giant question bank. I think that UWorld is very representative of MCAT content difficulty. UWorld considers to be a little bit harder, but I would say it's pretty close. I've maybe seen out of the 2,000 questions that are on UWorld, I didn't go through all of them, but I went through most of them. I would say maybe less than 5% are what I would call weirdly difficult or like something I wouldn't see on the exam. Most of it, I see the questions and it's like, yeah, I would expect that to be on the MCAT. And having taken like having done this for a while, I feel like I have kind of a sense for what would and wouldn't be a reasonable thing to ask on the MCAT. And so I personally would swear by it and say that UWorld is something that was a key factor in helping me get the score that I did on the exam.
How would you use your? Will you just do it as like set of price problem?
How did I use it? I used it kind of in chunks. I was like, okay, today I'm going to do certain topic, whether it's biochemistry or specifically like DNA structure and replication. And the goal is to, over time, use UWorld as both a testing resource, but also as a content resource, because UWorld is going to cover pretty much every single topic, subtopic, and subtopic that could be on the MCAT. And so it's useful for as a tool to practice and test where you are, but it's also a useful tool to fill up all the gaps in your knowledge. And eventually, if you get through enough UWorld questions, you will have basically seen all there is to see for the MCAT. And that can be a huge asset.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. What else y'all got? The test prep thing. It's called UWorld, like the letter U followed by the word world. You can get, it's basically a subscription. You can get like 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and it's like a couple $100, but I think it's well worth it, especially because like you could, like that's about how much like a Kaplan book set costs. And I personally think that UWorld is 100 times more useful than Kaplan is. Just because Kaplan and TPR Princeton Review tend to try to scare you into buying more of their crap by making it unnecessarily difficult. But UWorld doesn't really do that, because once you buy it, and that's it. Is anybody here contemplating taking an MCAT course? Okay, so you'll hear 1,000 different types of opinions about courses. We got one person, Jacqueline, who took Kaplan, so she might have some thoughts about it. I never took a course. I personally think that in general, when you're thinking about like budgeting for the MCAT, you want to spend as much of your money as possible, as in, like, if you're going to spend X amount of dollars on the MCAT, you want to spend as much of that amount as possible on practice, not content, because content is going to pretty much be available for free in a million different places. Khan Academy, the Organic Chemistry Tutor, MCAT-review.org, the AMC website, UWorld itself, just via its breadth of questions. Now, that's not to begrudge anyone who has taken a course, but personally, I would say that you could spend maybe 20% of the cost of a course, but instead of paying for like the structure, you pay for the for practice materials that then can get you, I think, a lot farther than the content plus structure that you'd be paying for. As far as in-person versus online, I mean, right now it's kind of a mess as far as what in-person courses could entail. I think online courses are fine. I mean, it depends on how well you learn. Like, a lot of people are kind of zoomed out right now, but it could potentially work for you if that's something you want to do. My personal recommendation, like I said, is I don't think courses are worth it, but that's just me. I don't know all of you, and so that might not be true for every single one of you. All right, what else? Do Khan Academy videos cover all the content? I would say they cover most of it, and whatever as in, like, I would say they get pretty close to all of it, but like the MCAT is like part content, but like part content, part how you use the content, and part how you interpret new uses of the content. So it's kind of like the content is only the starting point, mastering the content. So I think that Khan Academy does a really good job of being comprehensive, but I think that using those, like Khan Academy, in conjunction with something like the AMC materials or UWorld or MCAT-review.org is helpful. I would say, like, you always want to use more than one resource in case one covers something that the other doesn't. Ooh, that's a tough one. AMC gives you both section banks and practice tests, and you really do need practice tests, like full length, regular style practice tests. So I would say if you had to choose, AMC would be my recommendation. But if you're able to swing, if you already have 10, I don't know how good Altius is. Maybe they're good. I don't really trust third-party practice exams as far as their like content, but I don't know. I can't really say anything about ALGIS. The AMC in general, that is like the metric of how you're going to be doing. AMC QPACs, I think they're mixed. Some of them are maybe a little bit too easy, some of them might be a little bit extra. So okay, so my view on practice tests is that's a good point. You can get some things for free. So okay, so let me back up for a second. AMC versus UWorld. If you can swing it, which I know not everybody can, AMC plus UWorld is a very, very solid combo, and you can honestly get by with just that. If you have to choose, look into the AMC free stuff that was mentioned here, and if that doesn't work out, then I would just say stick with AMC, just because that's the real deal. As good as UWorld is, it's still third party. So practice tests. So I would say the practice tests on AAMC, the 4 practice tests, are the only practice tests that I know that are kind of reliable for judging yourself. And so what I would say is, if you're going to study over the course of several months, spread those 4 out over those months, plus the sample test you take at the very beginning before doing anything. If you're in the midst of studying and you haven't taken the sample test, take the sample test as the literal next thing you do, because that will tell you where you are, and knowing where you are is just as important as knowing where you're going. So as far as the third-party practice exams, I mean, I think they deflate the scores a lot. I think they throw in a lot of crap that you only really learn in med school. Like they'll throw in some first-year anatomy stuff that there's no way you would need to know for the actual MCAT. And so I think third-party practice exams are only useful really when it comes to like developing your stamina. So developing how you like getting used to the feel of a long exam, and getting used to like sitting and answering the questions, and like the fatigue and stuff like that. I think they're useful at gauging that, but I don't think they're great with actually telling you how you're doing as far as progress on content and skill. Other questions? What tests I use? I used AAMC, and then I used one next step. I think maybe it might have been Blueprint. Now I guess that's what it's called. I used one of those, but I didn't really like that one. So I only used the AAMC ones pretty much. And having 5 of those, like 5 is a fair few exams. So like I think it is definitely possible to get by with as far as using those as benchmarks for progress. I think that's it. That's sufficient for stamina. Like I said, you can bring in some third-party stuff, but take them with a grain of salt. Okay, Anki. I used Anki. I used it. So I used it for a little bit for biology, a little bit for chem phys when it was like discrete stuff that I had to memorize. I really used it for psych and soc because I was starting out with only intro psych as my background. That's it. And so I used there's that 300-page document from Khan Academy. I made my own deck, and I'd recommend that for all of you who are using Anki to make your own decks, because then it's an extra round of remembering. You remember, you learn them as you put them into the deck, then you remember them as you study the deck, and that way you get an extra round as you put them in the deck. So it does take more time, so that's why you want to start earlier on that stuff. But I made my own deck of like several hundred flashcards over the course of like 4 or 5 months from that 300-page document, and I could also tailor it to my own needs. So stuff I needed to focus on, I added more cards. Stuff I didn't need to focus on as much, I added fewer cards. And starting from intro psych, going from that, just using like the practice questions and UWorld and that 300-page document, I went from an intro psych to getting a perfect score on psych soc. So it can be done even if you start with very little psych and soc knowledge. Other questions? Okay, so this is a pretty flexible session. So I mean, if you don't have any more questions, you can always reach out to us. I will wait for a confirmation that all of you have no further questions before I end the meeting, though. But don't leave quite yet because I have a couple other things I wanted to talk about. So if you don't have any questions, go ahead and say in the chat that you don't have any further questions, just so I know I'm not missing anybody. Links or resources to offer biochem. Okay, so there are so this website is pretty good. The AMC website has a PDF of all the topics for every section. No further resources that I know of beyond what I talked about. Jacqueline, so mentioned previous presentations. Yeah, so I believe y'all are from pre-med scenes, so you guys should have you should have access to the recordings from the biochem and or biochem and chem phys and general sessions. If you don't, then let me see if I can grab those links. Okay, so the biochemistry one is right here. Let's see. To schedule a meeting, yes, that is the right email to send. Okay, so this is that first one. This is biochem. The general one. I'm not sure that that's, maybe it's here. Let's see. Okay. Here is the general MCAT one. And then chem physics. Chem physics is, I don't think it's up yet, but that will be included along with this, the post-session email for this session. Yeah, of course, no problem. All right, so if nobody has any further questions, so we are a volunteer organization, and we depend entirely on donations. So if you find the stuff that we're doing helpful, every little bit counts. Some people donate like $5 a session. Some people donate a little bit more. Some people donate a little bit less. But that money pays for like upkeep costs. So like like our website, things like that, like that require money. So yeah, so I believe we have PayPal via the same email, mcat101team@gmail.com. And you should receive an email with this recording, plus that additional session from last month. Yeah, so if there's any other further notes, I'll give you guys a second if you have any final things you wanted to ask or say, and then I'll wrap up the session. I am not currently in med school, so I'm going to apply this cycle. So I am currently doing a gap year, working at the National Institutes of Health here in Bethesda, Maryland, just outside of DC. So I'm working in a viral immunology lab, but I'm planning on applying MD, PhD very soon. Yeah, you are welcome. All right, thanks for coming. I'll just be on the lookout for that email, and I'll hopefully see you guys at another topic session.